colourful. Just colourful, yeah. Joy.
Music.
Beauty, because you saw them and say, oh, there are beautiful birds.
Seriously, they are so cute.
Parakeets in general, we love them. They add a bit of colour and noise and vibrancy to the local community.
Yeah, I agree. I like parakeets.
You definitely look at them and you think it looks out of place. It's like a bright green parakeet, and the sort of like stereotype of British birds is that it's lots of browns, little brown bird, medium-sized brown birds, big brown bird, and then you have something like a parakeet which is bright green. So it definitely looks out of place.
I think that it was just before I started the blog, a bit more than 10 years ago, that I first noticed the parakeets in the park. But when there were only a few of them, they were very exotic and interesting, and it was before the numbers really built up.
I became interested in parakeets because I was living in Hackney in North London for about 10 years, and when I moved to Hackney, I remember people talking about, there was like a rumour that there were these exotic birds in southwest London, and when you live on the other side of London, that seems like, you know, a continent away. Then by the time I left Hackney 10 years later, there were parakeets flying up and down the local river, the local canal, in my local park. And I realised that I'd been there at the same time as this ecological shift, where this species had suddenly appeared in a place it had never been before and was thriving. And nobody seemed to be talking about it.
I was slightly surprised to find how tame they became, but they're intelligent birds, and they've learned quickly, and they learn from each other, and they have discovered that people will feed them.
There's obviously issues with them. I think in birding circles, the bit that gets a bit annoying is they're very noisy, so when you're trying to listen to the dawn chorus for the unusual birds, sometimes they drown out all the others. But I don't think there's not really like a level of anger at them, if that's the sense. It's more irritants sometimes.
Birds that nest in holes, woodpeckers, nuthatches, for example. The parakeets take their holes.
I've seen great spotted woodpeckers fight with the parakeets, and great spotted woodpecker generally wins, and that's what I've sort of heard from bird feeders as well, that if there's great spotted woodpecker, parakeets generally lose. But then they can mob birds because it's their numbers.
We had a starting place which was Kensington Gardens, and we asked people randomly if they had seen the birds, if they knew anything about them, and recorded our interactions with those people. And we were sort of looking and listening out for the birds ourselves. I think one or two people said, oh, you have to go to this other place to get the birds. So we thought, okay, we'll do that. And the second place was
Kensal
Green Cemetery,
yeah.
Based on what a couple of people had said. So we thought, right, we'll go there next. And then we followed our noses around like this through 4 or 5 locations. And then we also realised, as we found out more, that the birds have these flyways.
Yeah, people would literally say that they fly down this street and they turn right at the end of the street, and they fly down that street and they turn left. And these are people that lived locally and had seen them doing this every day, like commuters. They just had a set route to get from where they roosted to where they liked to eat. We started seeing cemeteries and parks and canals and rivers very much kind of sort of had a sort of parakeet's eye view when you look at a map of London and you just look at the green and you kind of make sense of it. You know, these islands that they're hopping between, and often cemeteries seem to kind of connect up other green spaces and be these kind of important stepping stones. We started seeing the wildlife corridors, I think, through thinking why parakeets would be here and why they would be there. You see how it connects up, not through roads and tube lines, but through these flyways.
They're only just coping with the English climate. On the other hand, they seem to be getting tougher, because I've heard of parakeets in Scotland now. And they've spread all over Western Europe, and they're in Germany, for example, where it gets seriously cold in the winter, and they seem to be surviving there.
They're starting to be predated by birds of prey, so they're becoming part of the food chain.
I think parakeets are fairly easy to catch. Any fast raptor would be able to do it. They have some habits that make them vulnerable.
Think of it from like a peregrine's perspective, you know, bright, colourful, follow the same flight patterns most days. They're quite low down, so easy to hit.
Another interest we had was in these urban myths, the stories people told and the strange theories that they believe.
They come in boats, like in...
It was one ship, and they was trying to come over here, but this ship is cracked.
The containers. Yes.
Well, I heard some gentlemen brought in about 10, and they had a good Friday night, and before you know that, there was a bit more.
There are a lot of theories around, like the African Queen theory and the Jimi Hendrix theory.
Jimi Hendrix let go of these parakeets. Even more of a reason to love him.
And they're all rubbish, unfortunately.
But the overall story, obviously less sensational. It wasn't Jimi Hendrix parakeets that changed it. It was the sheer number over time and the population building up.
I'm guessing they're originally from a tropical country, and maybe have been brought over as pets at some time and have developed their own little community within the park.
There was apparently a lot of people releasing their captive birds in the 1910s or 20s, whenever the Spanish flu was, because of a fear of transmission then.
They've been coming here for a very, very long time. The Romans brought them, so they've been here for almost 2,000 years. And before that, parakeets were being brought into Europe along the Silk Road from India as pets.
So they were traded, by the sounds of it, from what we can gather, and they were a popular one.
Apparently in Kingston, and apparently about 40 years ago, a pair of super parakeets started breeding. And so the single factor that led to the present upsurge in the number of parakeets is evolution.
We quickly realised that the parakeets were a really strong vehicle for other things like imagination and belief and belonging, you know, and boundaries. Yeah, people would happily tell us all this stuff if we just talked about parakeets. Whereas maybe if we'd asked them directly about those subjects, they might not have wanted to talk about it.
We had this idea that parakeets are these blank canvases that people project their own views onto, or their kind of flying metaphors was another phrase that we used. That, you know, people start talking about parakeets and we'd ask them, what do you think about parakeets? Or have you seen any parakeets? And not every time, but quite often we'd realise they were suddenly talking about other things, and they were commonly immigration or invasion, or on the other side they'd be kind of immigration and multiculturalism and diversity and tolerance. So obviously in a city like London there's people from all over the world, and it seemed like people were projecting very human values onto parakeets. Another thing that they often go to is climate change, that people would associate them with a changing climate and assume that they almost have flown to London because it's warmer. We found that parakeets had really infiltrated the heart of British culture, that they have a pub sign. We found that the brewery have made parakeets their logo, and a rugby team have had parakeets as their emblem. If parakeets can be recognised by these institutions, then they've really been adopted by a lot of the population.